Okay, welcome. Thanks so much for being here today to join our research event on young people's engagement with AI and the parasocial relationships they are forming with this technology. This moderated discussion today is part of our 20th Annual Media Literacy Week. We are doing this in partnership with our colleagues and friends at the Internet Technology and Digital Sociology Cluster of the Canadian Sociological Association. So we're so thrilled to have them here and partnering with us. I'm just going to take a moment to recognize the land on which we are joining from. I'm joining today from the Three Fires Confederacy of the Odawa, Chippewa, and Potawatomi peoples. mediasmart's primary office is located on unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. mediasmarts is a national nonprofit charity. We are Canada Center for Digital Media Literacy, just about to celebrate our 30th anniversary. Our vision and mission is that everyone across Canada can use media in all forms confidently and critically. As I mentioned today, we are joined by four fantastic researchers who'll be introduced shortly. We're going to have a moderated discussion to speak about the rapidly emerging area of research in this digital media literacy space, AI or artificial intelligence literacy. Our panel today will speak about and engage in a moderated discussion around four questions centered around exploring the role of artificial intelligence in shaping digital ecosystems that young people engage with. As young people are forming increasingly complex relationships with AI-powered tools, from chatbots and virtual assistants to algorithmically curated influencers, avatars, and online companions, many questions about young people's parasocial relationships with AI persist. So we're very excited to be digging into some of those today. These relationships blur the boundaries between the social and the technological, with implications for identity, well-being, trust, intimacy, and power. So as I say, we're so thrilled to have our panelists here today. It's my pleasure to now pass the mic over to Dr. Michael Adorjan, Associate Professor at the University of Calgary, and one of the Internet Technology and Digital Sociology co-chairs. So Michael, I'll pass the mic off to you.
Thank you so much, Kara. I'm very excited to host today's panel. Just by way of introduction, I want to mention that I am based in Treaty 7 territory here in Calgary, Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, which includes the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. As well, the city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation within Alberta, Nose Hill Métis District 5, and Elbow Métis District 6. My pleasure to host this event. It's going to be a great discussion on youth AI and parasociality. And I will introduce the panelists, starting with Dr. Annabelle Kwanhase, who's a full professor at Western University in the Sociology and Information and Media Studies Department, as well as Takuya Maeda, who's a PhD student in Information and Media Studies at Western University. We have also Dr. Celeste Campos Castillo, an associate professor of media and information at Michigan State University, and Yolanda Zhang, a Wang postdoctoral fellow with the Fairbank Center for Chinese Studies at Harvard University. My thanks for everyone for their time today. This is going to be several rounds. There's going to be four structured questions. And, it's going to be fairly open-ended in terms of how we respond to these. We'll start generally with some introductory remarks. I'll ask you to each introduce yourselves in the order that I introduced you. I think we'll just do that, including how your work, including any past and current projects, intersects with this panel theme, which is, of course, parasocial relationships between youth and artificial intelligence. As well, what are you seeing in terms of how youth interact with generative AI? Can you explain or tell us what parasociality looks like with AI? So with that, we'll open it up for some general introductions. Annabelle, over to you.
Well, thanks so much, Mike, for the introduction. It's such a pleasure to be here today. And Yeah, I'm Annabelle, and I'm super excited to talk about that. And I'll start maybe just with some of how my past work intersects with the panel today. So we have been looking for a very long time um, studying how people communicate in mediated environments, and in particular, how social cues that exist, in the in-person world can translate, be coded into, be recreated as features in digital environments, whether that be social media or, other like texting or other communication technologies like that. So the way that I always think about it is a very simple example is when you're in the office, one of the things that is really nice about being, co-located is that if you see a colleague's door open, you can kind of knock and say hi and just have kind of like a very brief interaction. So how do you create those social moments in a mediated world? And I remember how WhatsApp, when it started, it had that green feature where you could see when somebody was at the same time as you on WhatsApp, and you could just kind of say hi. But of course, when we look at it, WhatsApp removed that feature, and that kind of demonstrates also the complexity of this, because when somebody signals that they're available, there's kind of an expectation of reciprocity. So Mike, if I said hi to you and then you didn't respond, then I would be wondering, well, what is that signaling again? And what I'm really curious about now, of course, moving into AI, chatbots, and other similar technologies is what are the kinds of social cues that are embedded and what are the implications of that? So I think that is what brings me to the question of parasociality. And when I look at parasociality and the idea that young people are imagining the relationships with the AI, I think what I'm the most interested in is to what extent do they understand where the limits of those relationships are, what different roles, for example, the AI can play or should play, to what extent they should trust those roles. So to me, these are actually questions of design as well. I think there's a lack of transparency there. The design kind of obfuscates a lot of these social interactions. So I think that thinking a lot more about how can we design these technologies to create more clarity and transparency as to what they are, how they're interacting with people. I think that that's the kind of work that I'm hoping to do moving forward. And I'll pass it to Takuya.
Thanks so much. Takuya, over to you.
Hi, thanks. Hi, I'm Takuya Maeda. So I'm third year PhD student at Faculty of Information Media Studies at Western University. My work is kind of intersection between critical computing, AI ethics, broadly in a sort of understanding how a certain interaction could lead to the harmful outcomes. So my work usually deal with like the interaction space between users and technical systems like LLM chatbot. And in terms of parasociality, I previously looked at the parasocial dynamics between like users and AI system has like a contribution from both developers and designers side and then the user side. Because the chatbots are built with natural language, so it's kind of inviting like social interaction, whereas users can interact like how they talk to like their peers with these technical systems. So it's seemingly having a two-way communication, but it is similar to like the how people interact with like a TV, like a celebrities or influencers on the social media. Like it's just a one-way communication, but it looks like it's a two-way. So there could be the potential impact on the use in terms of how they might develop the interpersonal communication with these tools, because chatbot always provide the feedback that reinforce or affirm their responses. So but the human to human interactions are not always like the positive reinforcement. So I'm a little bit concerned that how like these like a positive affirmation and coming from the chatbot could impact on the youth. So yeah, that's like the kind of research that I'm interested in moving forward. Yeah.
And already we've got some great points for discussion, don't we? You know, big tech, transparency, and also long-standing questions on technology, you know, the impact of television or radio at the time and how people were consuming those sort of things. Anyhow, I'll leave that to the discussion. Thank you, Takuya. Over to you, Celeste.
Hi everyone. I'm excited to be a part of this panel and to learn from the panelists here. So I'm a researcher who studies technologies, how they can benefit and harm the health of youth with a primary focus on teens and adolescents. I usually work directly with youth design research that represents their views on how the world should or should not work. I've studied the benefits and harms of generative AI, including popular chatbots like Replica. And much of this work is about how youth are using chatbots or would like to use chatbots to support their mental health. And this isn't just chatbots designed specifically for mental health support. It's the companion chatbots like Replica that I just mentioned in Character AI. And Character AI, of course, it's interesting here in the US because it's been linked to the past couple of years to deaths by suicide among adolescents. So it's companion bots like these that I take a look at, as well as other general purpose chatbots, large language models like a ChatGPT. So a broad range of generative AI that I look at that youth are using to support their mental health. And well, some of this recent research. So I conducted a survey here in the US over the past summer to understand how teens are using chatbots. And about 3/4 of them were using chatbots, about the same percentage as using voice assistants like Siri and Alexa. Mostly general purpose chatbots like ChatGPT. One of the things that stood out to me about these findings is that of the teens who are using chatbots, few of them are using chatbots only for emotional support or mental health support. Those that do use chatbots for emotional support, they tend to also use it for homework help. And so, in other words, this tells me that the parasocial relationship that youth and adolescents in the US are likely to have with chatbots or as a tutor. Parasocial relationships where the chatbot provides emotional support, like a friend, a therapist, or a romantic partner. While this does happen, it was about 1/4 of the time. When this does happen, it's not necessarily a primary draw, at least not right now, of chatbots for teens. Instead, it seems to be using the chatbot as a tool, as an entertainment device as well, but to learn how to do things and pass the time. And then it appears, I mean, I still need to do some more digging into here. So this is the next couple of years here, it appears that it then crosses over into emotional support. I've also conducted interviews about 2 years ago with teens across from the US to understand how they would imagine using a chatbot that provides them with mental health supports. And I bring this up because, many of them love the idea, that it feels anonymous, you can be honest, and it's there whenever you need it. But here, the surprising part was in just sheer volume of comments that we received was that they hated the idea of a chatbot to support mental health. In addition to liking it, they also hated it, and I wasn't necessarily expecting that. And it's because the teens, and this was again, this was about two years ago. They recognize limitations of AI, but even then, I did receive comments because the entire interview was, if you could imagine an ideal chatbot, and so they said, even in the perfect world where the accuracy issues were fixed, there were no hallucinations, that they still wouldn't want that as their mental health safety nets. And I want to emphasize that last part, safety nets. They view chatbots as a band-aid, a temporary fix for a broader problem of mental health. They don't want to prefer not to have relationships or long-term relationships with chatbots. They know they should be talking to humans, but and this is the key part here. For various reasons, they can't or prefer not to talk to humans. They want chatbots to instead help them better connect to humans who can support them. And again, here I'm talking to teens. It's not just anybody that they want to be connected to. They don't want to be connected to national hotlines, which I know a lot of chatbots do when they assess risk and crises. But they prefer to be connected instead to local people, like their school counselors. Again, these are adolescents, so local people who can eventually provide them in-person supports. Um, and this is just a more preferred way of forming a parasocial relationship to a chatbot as a sort of intermediary or go-between between them and other more local humans. And so, is my take on what's going on. Yes, youth are forming parasocial relationships with AI, but it's not because they necessarily want to. It's because they feel as if they have no other option. They feel compelled because of the lack of social support, or they feel like they lack social support too. There's some foundational issues here. Yeah, I'm a sociologist, so I think about these more broader foundational issues that are compelling or inclining the youth to turn to chatbots because they feel like there's nobody else around that they can turn to. Um, and I guess I can turn it over to Yolanda, or you turn it over to Michael, so you can turn it over to Yolanda.
It's all good. Thank you so much, Celeste. Celeste, the questions on the offline environments and the circumstances that young people are in and how that influences how they access these technologies and use them is quite a prescient studies that you've been looking at. So thank you so much for your introductions. I'm sure we'll circle around as well as we go. But over to you, Yolanda.
Thank you, Michael. My name is Yolanda. I'm currently the N1 postdoctoral fellow at the Fehrenbach Center for Chinese Studies at Howard University. So before joining Howard, I received my PhD in information studies from the University of Toronto. So my research interest in emotional AI actually emerged from my teaching because all my students were very excited about, the scholarship and discussions about AI companionship, as well as, it also began during my, term as PhD fellow at the Schwartz-Westman Institute for Technology Society in Toronto, as a side project in addition to my dissertation research, which is about industrial upgrading of the agri-food value chains. So I have presented at communication and media studies conferences about a Japanese commercial emotional AI product, Gatebox. So, but I think we have already talked a lot about, companionship AI, but I want to, bring everyone's attention to another lesser known but very important form of AI parasociality, which involves, griefbox, griefbots, which allow users to basically interact with digital simulations of their lost loved ones. And it actually involve, chatbots, trained on the digital traces. So basically the user, they can upload the text, emails, or like social media posts, or even voice recording of the deceased individuals to recreate, their voice or conversational style. So these kind of griefbots, they also provide these companionship, functions, but they also, they claim to help young people to also cope with loss, and such technology, promise comfort by enabling, continued communication with the departed. So in addition to questions such as, these chatbots, they're always validating, our emotions and our concerns and always responding. Another feature about these emotional AI or AI companionship also very interests me is the anthropomorphization of AI, which basically refers to the tendency to attribute human qualities, such as emotions, intentions, like consciousness, or even personality, to these generative AI systems. So this can happen because, AI systems, they use human-like languages. So for example, like replica, basically you can, as user, you can create and customize the digital persona for replica. And the replica can also learn from the users, their conversations to gradually developing a communication style that feels, more familiar and even more emotionally responsive to the user. So for my future research, I want to look deeper into the question of anthropomorphization, as well as the industrial policies and the innovation chains, of the emotional AI industry through a comparative lens.
So fascinating, so fascinating. And affect and emotions and coping seem to be a central theme already in terms of what we're discussing. Yeah, it's really fascinating areas. So the second quite overall question builds upon this in terms of the algorithms for that are driving AI. The question is, and again, I think I can just leave this open to anyone can jump in at this point if you like. We can just do that. But obviously, we should have time for everyone to jump in for this. So the second question is this: what are the effects of parasocial youth interactions with generative AI? For example, chatbots as emotional companions, or for mental health advice. Unlike interpersonal relationships where the interaction is between people, generative AI interactions are driven by algorithms. So, how does this affect youth social and emotional development? And also, how does bias and stereotyping exhibited by Gen AI affect youth perceptions of social identity? Anyone can jump in.
I want to just jump in and follow up on what the other panelists said, because I think that really builds well around some of the kind of sociological work that I think really influences this, and that is the role that the way that youth learn about social roles in context. So I mean, that literature in sociology is very rich, and it just kind of shows the complexity of when you grow up as a youth. You learn that different social environments, you can play different social contexts and social roles. So for example, you can be, a student at school, and you can be a friend in your network, and you can be very competitive, with your sports team. So just kind of understanding how you as a person form your identity and all these different roles is such an important, part of socialization. Also, sometimes how these contexts collapse and how you manage, when there are different norms at home, maybe, religious expectations versus at the school, and how do you solve that conflict? And I think that where I see a lot of the tension here with the AI is that at least the current versions, social roles are not really taken much into consideration. I mean, when we look at the prompt of ChatGPT, ask me anything, it just kind of signals there is no boundaries. You can do anything you want in this environment. There's no consequences to your actions. And I see that as really problematic with youth and growing up, because it kind of opens up the space where there's no expectations on their behavior. There's no real understanding of how you should act, what you shouldn't do. And maybe going back even to the mental health part, I think a big part of what happens in an interaction with a therapist is that boundaries are set. There's an understanding of, let's say, you're going to get that help 1 hour a week, or you're going to have an opportunity to talk to somebody and give you advice for that period of time. So boundaries really matter a lot in these kinds of mental health interactions. Also, because you want people at the end of the day to have the strategies to solve, the problems in their lives by themselves. And I think that potentially that is where I see a lot of problems in terms of youth interactions with the Gen AI, is that and I think, you all said it so well. It's always available. It's always accessible. There are no kind of boundaries and norms that are really well established. And, I mean, I feel like I may be repeating myself a little bit here, but as I said, is that also I think there's not really a lot of attempts on the part of the designers to build that into the systems themselves, to kind of clarify, well, maybe as a user, I want to set up parameters and set different roles for my AI. Maybe an AI that helps me maybe schedule something, or an AI that gives me more advice on sports, so that there's like a context definition of how the AI operates. And maybe that's something I'd like to hear all of your opinions about, but I kind of worry in terms of the development of youth that is contextless, right? That there's no ability for like a religious context or a sport context, that maybe there's this kind of blending of roles and context that there's a lot lost here in terms of how really our social interactions normally work, and how we are able to even switch roles and switch identities, which, I grew up multilingual. So to me, really being able to switch, between different cultures and between different environments has been an important part of, just my own identity.
I want to jump in here. So I actually have a very interesting anecdote to share. So I was teaching in summer 2025, and one of my students, he must be from like Gen Z, he told the class, he shared in a presentation that, he uses ChatGPT for, relationship advice all the time. So basically what he shared was that, he has a partner, and then like she is very, she got frustrated, when, sometimes the student was too busy and couldn't really, spend time with her. So she and then he got very frustrated and asked ChatGPT, so why doesn't she just understand me? So he shared this during a group presentation, and then what struck me was, and he described the experience that the response he got from ChatGPT was actually quite reasonable. So the ChatGPT can very reasonably, that's what he shared, very reasonably, share, what his girlfriend's, perspective can be like. And then he then told me that, since then, he always asks for ChatGPT to understand another person's, view or perspective. And it can also make him to be very calm. So I found, the role for these kind of generative AI systems, can be quite very interesting and complex. We oftentimes, criticize them for kind of promoting a kind of transactional empathetic experience, right? Because they're by design to let us feel more familiar, or to let us feel where it is validating our views and our concerns. But from that anecdote, I feel these tools, if being combined with other sort of critical thinking, or other like digital literacy, education, it can actually provide some useful tips for younger people, to understand other others' perspectives. I'm just sharing that anecdote here.
And I'd love to just jump on both of these comments here from Annabelle and Yolanda, because as I previewed in my opening remarks, I've been thinking a lot about these general purpose chatbots like ChatGPT, where it's really just compared to some of the others, like character AI, like they have characters specifically to play out particular roles. And you can, of course, design your own characters as well to play out particular roles. But these general purpose chatbots like ChatGPT, where there's fewer bounds, you could potentially ask you to do anything and everything, and I worry a little bit that could potentially be this gateway into more harmful interactions. So there's that risk, but then there's also the probability of benefits, the way that Yolanda is saying in the anecdote, and that I've seen empirically as well in my own work and in reading other literature. So I think there's some sort of empirical basis for that anecdote of people describing how they used a general purpose chatbot, like maybe they were doing homework or learning how to code, and then all of a sudden they break up with their girlfriend or whatever over text or something, and then they ask, "Oh, what do you think? What is going on with this person's perspective?" And it can has the potential to teach things like empathy, and which brings me to something else too that I also resonated with me that Yolanda ended with, which is the importance of literacy, of AI literacy, which is training youth on how to use these tools, and of course that needs to be balanced against the risks, and I know, here in the US, states, and I know some platforms as well, like Character AI was announcing some moves about restricting access to chatbots for certain ages, the younger ages, the adolescents I've been researching, and of course, if we restrict, we address those risks that I mentioned, and lots of other folks have mentioned as well. But it also place limitations on the ability to equip youth to use these tools to improve their relationships with others. And so in Yolanda's anecdote that I've seen play out in other empirical cases as well, it's not that the student was drawn to the chatbot to create it into its own AI girlfriend. No, it was that it was drawn to the chatbot, ChatGPT, to learn how to improve his relationship with his human girlfriend. And so there's lots of balancing here that I think policymakers need to think about, and that we as researchers can help them think about more by conducting important work about these balancing these risks and benefits.
Absolutely. And it maps onto wider discussions about, restrictions on social media, what's going on in the Australian context more widely, or particular schools and that sort of thing as well, in terms of the balancing those risks and benefits as part of that conversation now, isn't it? Takuya?
Yeah, maybe like other panelists always talk about the benefits, so maybe I will throw something that is a little bit like on the risk side. I think that one of the thing that needs to be careful using like LLM or any chatbot is that the training data are predominantly coming from Euro-American sort of data sets and English speaking mostly. So the cultural standards that is represented in the text or maybe even the images often come from like Euro-American standards. For example, there's a cases of like indigenous people having an American smile on the photo, or having a photo that is like similar to like like the pictures of group pictures that people in North America usually take. So there's a risk of sort of like overriding other cultures, or like the benefit that it has been mentioned might not be going to the same like different group of people. That some people just gain more benefit, like richer gets richer kind of like sort of situation could possibly happen as well. And also that I think that there could be also a risk in terms of like using this as for the emotional dependency, because there's a like not enough chance of conflict or disagreement because of the how reinforcement learning works, like how like it will create the responses that are human-like, or like the responses are anthropomorphized like too much with how people value or how people see things. So there might not be any room to sort of have like a negative interaction with like the bots. So like in terms of emotional support, or like learning about like cultivating empathy probably requires like some the boundary that Annabelle was mentioned, or like the talk about like more about like the sort of discomfort that you have in like a sort of in the therapy session as well. Like therapists will throw in the discomfort, the uncomfortable situation if the patient need it. So like there needs to be some of the balance, like the Celeste was mentioning, with the benefit and the risk. And oftentimes risks are not highlighted in the mainstream media because they're often focusing on the what's future as opposed to like what causing a problem among the use or like anyone that using the chatbot. So yeah, I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Takuya. Absolutely. In terms of privacy risks, I mean, the third question relates to approaches like data valence or the collection of data that it's often just kind of a hum that goes in the background. It's not necessarily targeted surveillance. We're more aware of these things now. I'm not sure about our ability to respond to them effectively. But in terms of Gen AI by youth and the datafication of youth emotions and identities as they share personal information, what are some of the ethical and privacy concerns that you have regarding this, especially in the context of the potential benefits as we've discussed?
I might want to jump in this first.
Please do. Yeah.
Okay. So I think the one of the thing that maybe correlate with the previous like social media the concerns in the social media platforms is that this could be another way of harvesting the intimate data. Especially now that Celeste, you're on the talking about like the people are sharing like relationship advice or maybe like a how to improve their personal circumstances. That's kind of a very like a private, like personal, intimate type of data that the platform hasn't had the sort of like the access to. But now, because of this seemingly reciprocal interaction, it could lead to like more intimate, like something about maybe like the grief or something about their mental health problem, or maybe they have a relationship sort of advice or empathy, like the where like the privacy in terms of privacy concern, like where the line between like that could be leading to like the next training model, like because of the transparency for platforms are not adequate in terms of knowing how much of these data are used or you know uh repurpose it for other purposes. So it's like so there needs to be some sort of like mitigation, like a strategy to sort of like be more transparent about like the data practices, I think.
Thank you,
Yeah.
Takuya. Yeah. Yolanda?
Yeah, so just add on that. So I want to also emphasize that, the emotional data does not remain confined to like a single interaction with the chatbot, but it circulates within, what is called, as a platform ecosystem, right? So just much like how Google integrates, data across its services like Google Search, Google Maps, Gmail, YouTube, and Fitbit to like refine user profiles and maximize, profit. So emotional AI tools can, operate in a very similar way. And another thing that really came to my mind is that, when we outsource, these kind of emotional labor, or sometimes, some part of the therapist, work into this platform mediated, very transactional experience of empathy. So I feel it can pose challenges to mental health education and professionals, because sometimes there are like accessibility problems, right? So if users, when they got used to this kind of very always available and always consistent and always validating empathetic responses, they may not turn to, or for example, for youth, they may not turn to clinical professionals to seek professional guidance. So I feel that can also pose some of the social challenges as well regarding emotional AI companionship or mental health issues.
Yeah, I mean, just jumping in here, I feel like a lot of the literature, the theories that applied to social media apply similarly, where the point of transparency information from the big tech is really unavailable. We use the technologies, but there's not a lot of information in terms of exactly what, there's like this black box that we all feel we're interacting with. And I think that's really problematic. And to me, there needs to be a lot more regulation. And I think, Celeste, I really like your literacy point, because the more literate I think youth become, the more agency they have, the more they understand. And it's not about telling young people exactly how to use the technologies or when they're useful or what they could do for them, but definitely providing a much more deeper understanding of what is that interaction like, what are the boundaries, why would you want to use it, when would you want to use it, when not. And I remember when the big Facebook contagion study came out, which I'm sure that's a kind of like one of the most central examples of ethics. It was clear that they had used an experimentation where they, changed the interface, changed where people were looking, and could demonstrate that in fact affects our emotions directly. But people weren't really informed. There was no informed consent. And that worries me, because that was one study. After that, they didn't publish any more of their experiments. So I'm really concerned, in particular with young people whose identity are still forming, that not knowing where their data is going, how that data, and I think to your point, is going back to them and influencing what they think or how they feel, the empathy that they have, or how vulnerable they are. That I think is in terms of the data privacy point, Mike, really to me very problematic. I unfortunately have to jump, but thank you so much for having me join, and look forward to hearing more how the panel continued.
Thanks, Annabelle.
And then I'd love to just extend some of the thoughts here, because this is related to a lot of the implications that I pay close attention to, the demographic patterns of who is likely to seek a chatbot for emotional support. And so, as I mentioned in my research with adolescents, they like the idea of having a chatbot there, because it's something to deal with the fact that they feel as if there's nobody else that they can turn to. And that feeling is not evenly distributed across the population of adolescents. It tends to be adolescents who are marginalized with respect to their racial or ethnic identity, marginalized with respect to their sexual orientation or gender identity. These kinds of youths from these various groups, that they feel as if they cannot turn to their teachers, their school counselors, or they're worried that their parents will yell at them and tell them to just get over their struggles with mental health. And so, if we extend everything that we've been talking about here, it's, the risk of datafication of youth emotions is likely not evenly distributed across the population of youth, that there's going to be these inequalities because certain groups, subgroups of the populations, those who tend to be marginalized, are the ones who are most likely to seek out chatbots for emotional support.
Yeah, it reminds me of Dana Boyd's work in the United States as well, in terms of teens and the questions of digital divides as well, with these things. Yeah, the emotions are real, and sometimes these online platforms, I'm thinking of persistent virtual environments, also like Second Life, that I find interesting to examine, about how you can have real strong connections there that you may not have in certain offline spaces. In the question of how we respond, of course, I think there's general agreement of more critical media literacy skills, AI, maybe algorithmic awareness, and just understanding what happens when how you can train your TikTok, page, that opens up, that when you open up TikTok, that can be quote unquote trained very quickly. But there's a lot there that can be done also at the level of big data technology corporations and how, like Annabelle was talking about, more transparency in that regard. And the complication too about the post-truth environment that we're in, right? It's if you can go to a clinician or you can go to a physician and get advice, but then look up something online that contradicts that, or depending on what you're looking at. So I think that adds complications to that as well. Absolutely. Yolanda, did you want to jump in with the question there about the datafication aspect of that?
Oh, yeah, I think emotional AI technology they can be functioning very similarly to other platform provider, just like Google, how it shares data within its own, like the platform ecosystem, right? And maybe to um connect to our the question about policy or like digital media literacy, literacy. So I feel in terms of digital literacy education, so we need to let the young people to know just to not just about how to use these technologies wisely, but how to really understand what relationship really mean and what it means to be like a human member within a community. And in terms of digital literacy, I think it also includes, like education about, how to recognize that the tool-like nature of these generative AI systems, to understand why they were developed and what kind of data and power structures really sustain them, and the broader political economy, that really shape how they work, and also maybe some education about the innovation chains that really sustain these technologies. So only when they can, approach these technologies with, some awareness or some, digital literacy, using them, they can recognize them more as aids rather than, substitutes for genuine like human connections, or treating them as therapists because of the, the anthropomorphization of these AI technologies these days.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're discussing now. I mean, I didn't formally introduce the fourth question, but we're pretty much on that in many respects. This question about what needs to be included when developing literacy, digital media literacy resources to address concerns regarding when you've used Gen AI, the question of parasociality, and what policymakers and platform designers need to consider. And the discussion reminds me of those examining shadow banning, and those, examining systems that, as Annabelle said, that black box that we don't know what's happening. So at the most, we've got these folk theories when it comes to, shadow banning or how AI systems work. Um, I also find it interesting how these systems are increasingly connected to just about everything, right? In terms of the Internet of Things, you have your smart toaster now or whatever, and everything is like internet connected. I mean, to what degree, we're talking about very specific, you go to the website, ChatGPT or other ones, and you access these systems. To what degree are these becoming increasingly unavoidable in all aspects of life? Like, you can not go to ChatGPT, but you can, if you go to Google, I mean, it'll ask you to sign up for their paid service over here. But universities are all also developing their own proprietary brands, if you like, about AI systems. So there's a lot of embracing AI systems, but there's a lot to consider, including environmental impacts of these things. I think one of my graduate students was mentioning to me about the fact that a lot of these AI infrastructures and systems require potable water to operate. In terms of, they're not at all renewable, and they require vast systems and things of that nature. But I've heard that also that companies like Microsoft and others are investing also in the environment in different respects. So it's an ongoing conversation about the wider corporate mediation of these things.
Maybe adding on to the environmental impact, maybe also need to mentioning about the human labor behind these large language models development, like how the content moderator in the global south often contribute to annotating data or filtering the toxic data from the training data set, and with like a very small amount of compensation. So that when you teach literacy, like Yolanda said, I think it's important to extend more than how they can use these tools, but they need to understand the context of how these tools are developed. So that they can get informed about like the limitation of these technologies, cost of these technologies, like environmentally, human labor as well, and also communicating the sort of differences between the hype, what's mentioning in the media, as opposed to what's the reality of these tools. What can they provide? What can they not provide? And what can we do to have the same kind of impact without using these technologies? For example, maybe mentioning more about third spaces that can be provided to have more emotional or more communal support that they can seek locally. I think the oftentimes discussing about literacy going to technological solution, but there needs to be the conversation outside of the technological solutions to be the part of the literacy sort of resources for the youth so that they can sort of like judge based on the available options that they have. Yes, there's the obstacles of actually seeking those support would be a next step, but I think having all the cards available to them is the one way to start, I feel like.
And I'll just jump in here, but I love Takuya's idea of including a discussion of the impact of these systems on the environment and on human labor as part of AI literacy. Because I hear ethics as part of a dimension of AI literacy, but it's usually in the context of, when you should or should not use generative AI. And I love this idea of thinking about the ethics in terms of the broader implications for globally for the planet, because of generative AI. But more broadly here, and this is something that I've started to have conversations with other folks as well and youth advocacy groups as well. But we need to start following the lead of others, like UNICEF. UNICEF says that youth have a right to have a say in how AI is designed and regulated. And so I think our opinions as researchers, they certainly matter. At least for me, it's been a long time since I've been labeled under the category of youth or a young person, and so I think it's important to ask youth themselves and to bring them into the decision making table, and they could tell us, they could tell us that we could find out from them directly from them the best way to support their use of generative AI in ways that balance these risks and harms that we've mentioned here, and also how best to develop AI literacy curriculum and how best to implement it. As I said, I'm just kind of making an educated guess here in terms of what they would want. And I think more broadly too, because things change quickly. So to me, I think it's important to make sure that youth are there as decision makers, or at least informants for regulations and also the design of these systems.
Yeah, that's a great point. That question of human rights and including young people in terms of citizenship and inclusion as well. Yolanda or Takuya, anything related to that you want to mention?
I just want to add a quick point about the importance of having, interdisciplinary experts and educators, as well as the youth themselves, to be part of, the conversation and policy discussions, or like design framework discussions about, how AI companionship can be designed in a different way, or how to improve, some of the, current, design, logics to ensure that, the use perspectives and like social impacts are meaningfully addressed. And then also the need to require a clear disclosure of, how these emotional or behavioral data are being collected, stored, and shared with third parties. Because sometimes, these data are shared in a aggregated manner, meaning that there may not necessarily be like identifiable data. But these behavioral data are they're very intimate in the data, right? So so clear there's a regulatory gap there. So more work should be done, for this for a society, as a collective.
Yeah, I've often had skepticism about metadata, that whole concept of the aggregation of data and how that is geared to be anonymized. Corporations suggest that, oh, the privacy's not besmirched because this is all aggregated, but there have been cases of that not being the case. And in this case, we're talking often about very intimate emotional details, disclosures of grief, and other mental health struggles. Takuya?
Yeah, I wanted to also, I love the idea of bringing like youth populations to sort of like regulatory decisions, or bring them their opinion on the table, because I think that the policymaker or even researchers and developers and designers probably should know the motivation behind why young people are going to these tools instead of the people, and what are their struggles, or like struggle with their day-to-day life, but also like with these tools. So I think, and also like I feel like the current regulations on the technology tends to be top-down, but I think a bottom-up approach sounds like more fair in terms of like tailored to different demographics or different population, because every population has a different need. Use definitely had a major implication, like major impact by the generative AI system. So yeah, having them like on board, it would be interesting direction, I feel like.
Absolutely. Yeah, speaking as a qualitative researcher myself, that bottom-up approach I think is particularly important to get youth perspectives, from those who are marginalized or those who benefit, within digital divide systems and stuff like that. Well, that was a good discussion, I think.